soon as the emperor was settled in his bivouac, he had his table set up and began to work over a map which he had opened. He then dictated different orders and instructions relating to the operations of the campaign, which he had thought out and in which he had just taken the first steps. When he had finished his work, he went to walk about while waiting for his dinner, stopping at the bivouacs of the soldiers while he talked to them, or turning his steps towards the road which ran besides the meadow on the north side. There he talked to the people who passed, of whom there were but few, and asked them questions. When the dinner hour arrived, he sat down with his generals. When the meal was over, he walked about again, talking sometimes with Grand Marshal, sometimes with General Drouot, or some other members of the suite. During the evening, the advanced post on the road to Cannes stopped a courier who was brought to the emperor's bivouac. This man said that he was in the service of the Prince of Monaco, whose carriage he was preceding, and that formerly he had been a postilion of the Empress Josephine. Some people connected with the stables recognized him as such. The emperor asked him about the public feeling at the capital and what was said about him, Napoleon, the Bourbons, etc. His Majesty appeared well enough satisfied with what this courier answered and dismissed him, telling him to go on his way. He was going to Monaco. It was already late when the emperor, feeling the need of rest, wrapped his body in a coverlet of wool and very light, sat down in his folding armchair with his legs outstretched on a chair and covered with his cloak. He tried to sleep for a few hours. He remained in this position till the hour of departure. About 1 o'clock after midnight, everybody was on foot again. Camp was struck soon afterwards. And at 2 o'clock, the troops marched out. A few cavalrymen who had horses escorted the emperor, while the others who were on foot carried their saddles, their knapsacks, and their arms on their backs. It was very uncomfortable and an extremely awkward load. We were going to Grasse. On our way, the head of the column met the Prince of Monaco. When the prince was informed of the emperor's presence, he got out of his carriage and came to greet him. They went together to sit beside the bivouac fire, which was in their right hand before one enters the village and a little away from the road. Their conversation was still going on when the group with which I was marching was about to enter the village. This was the first village which we met with. It was probably gone. Half an hour later, the emperor caught up with us and was soon ahead of us. During the morning, fairly early, we arrived at Grasse. Like most of the members of the household, I was on foot. The emperor got there long before us. We learned that he had gone on still farther before continuing on our way, my companions and I wished to restore our strength by taking some food, so we went into a little inn and had a short meal. We ate it as rapidly as possible, being anxious not to be left behind. The population of the little town was afoot. It appeared to us neither hostile nor sullen. In a little square, we stopped for a moment. There was a fountain in which was carved a phrase in praise of the Bourbons, followed by the indispensable Vive le Roi. On the same square, I saw our two cannon, the emperor's carriage. The road over which we were to travel was impassable for carriages in places, and as the country was very hilly, they had wisely decided to leave them at Grasse. And they were perfectly right, for they would have delayed our march without being of the least use to us. We set out again. As we left the town, we had to climb a high mountain. When we reached the top, we saw a circle formed by a considerable number of people, townsfolk and peasants, women and children, in the midst of whom were the emperor and his staff. His Majesty talked and chatted with most of the people who composed the circle, one after the other. In spite of all his efforts, these people remained almost cold. Probably the emperor had breakfasted at this spot, and all those about him had accompanied him from the town. We did not stop there. Being on foot, the best thing we could do was to get ahead and arrive at our camping ground as soon as possible. Consequently, we marched on with more zeal than ever. Hardly anybody but the advance guard marched in any order. The body of the little army was scattered along the road, forming a quantity of little squads, all more or less weak. Many of the soldiers marched alone. They were at home, and for that reason they had nothing to fear. We were in Provence, but those who wished us ill, taken by surprise, had not time to do anything. We bivouacked wherever the head of the column stopped. On the second, we slept at Serignan. On the third, at Bérem. On the fourth, at Denis. And the fifth, at Gap. During these 4 days, we suffered a good deal. We were not accustomed to fatigue. The first 2 days were the most painful. There were mountains whose tops we had to reach, narrow defiles through which we had to pass. Sometimes snow, sometimes mud prevented us from marching as fast as we should have liked. I remember that in one extremely narrow and dangerous defile, a mule rode over a precipice. In spite of the fatigue of the long days of marching, I do not think that anybody remained behind. We set out in the morning before day, and it was always very late before we reached our halting place. When once we had reached Gap, we traveled more easily in each city, town, or village through which we passed. We bought all the horses able to carry a man, and it was in this way that the Poles, many officers, and all members of the household were mounted. There were also some other means of transport for tired soldiers, and the small amount of baggage which we had with us. All of us of the household had left our belongings at Porto Ferraio, bringing only what was necessary for the journey. It was a Gap that the Emperor's first proclamation was printed. It was there also that we saw a little more enthusiasm on the part of the population, and a few soldiers who had retired to their homes came to augment our small little army. It was something anyhow. As we advanced, the decisive moment approached. When we landed, we had no eagle. It was only the second or third day that we got one. It was a wood and probably came from the rod of a bed or window curtain. It had been fastened on a pole, and with some pieces of stuff of the 3 colors they had made a flag of it.